to bring communities together for such community conversations. And our mission is about workforce integration, but at the same time, our civic engagement and citizenship, which covers programs such as these. We hope that we bring those voices which normally are not being heard, and also offer them opportunities to tell their stories. And for long, uh, members of BIPOC communities and immigrants have been kept out of this very important conversation. And we were not offered the seat at the table. And of course, justice, climate, and climate change does not know any boundaries or race or ethnicity, and or one's immigration status, where you're born. It is about all of us. It's common to all of us, and as such, I'm really delighted and to be part of this, and grateful to Jonah and Kathy for including our voices in this. So again, thank you all. And we're so happy to be part of this important conversation. And here I would invite my group and friend Kathy Lee to take over.
Thanks, Reza, and thanks, Jono. 10 years ago, I took the idea for this program to the University of Maine School of Law and said, you know, the demographic is changing in Maine. There are amazing international leading women in the developing world that nobody here in Maine knows about, has the chance to meet, and we should bring them here so people here can see that there are extraordinary women leaders all over the world who don't look like us. And that was the beginning of this program. And every year for the last 10 years, we've had some extraordinary woman from Afghanistan, Liberia, Botswana, Syria, Mexico, Malaysia, India, Zimbabwe. And in addition to giving a big public lecture, the most important piece of this program, as far as I'm concerned, is the community connection. And that's what this evening is about. It's connecting our speakers to people in Maine who are also making change in their own communities. And we're going to hear from, we know Kosi because she's with us, and hopefully Darcy will join us as well, both young women who are making change in Alaska and here in Maine, connecting with their communities in order to do that around this very important issue of climate change. So our goal every year is to showcase the work of women making change so we can recognize them, show our appreciation for what they do and for how they do it. They inspire us to do more ourselves. And our speakers tonight, in addition to Darcy and Kosi, we have Shenna Bellows, who is an inspiration to all of us. They're all women who are making change in the world. Secretary of State Shenna Bellows is Maine's 50th Secretary of State, sworn into her first 2-year term in January of this year. She is the first woman ever in the state of Maine to hold this position. She grew up in Hancock, Maine, graduated from Ellsworth High School. She has a BA in International Politics and Economics from Middlebury College. She volunteered with the Peace Corps in Panama and with AmeriCorps Vista in Nashville, Tennessee. She's a graduate of the Emerge program in Maine, which trains women to run for office, the Institute for Civic Leadership in Portland, and the Yale Campaign School for Women. Secretary Bellows has, even at her young age, had such a varied and impressive career doing all sorts of different jobs. She served in the Maine Senate for 2 years, 2 terms rather, where she was responsible for passage of so many important pieces of legislation. She led the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine. She ran her own consulting business through which she advised organizations like the Sierra Club in Maine, Consumers for Affordable Health Care, the Maine Women's Lobby. She was for a time the interim executive director of Learning Works. She ran for the US Senate. She was the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Maine, and she served on the executive committee of the 2009 and 2012 ballot campaigns to pass marriage equality in Maine, which we finally did. She was a founding member of the Maine Immigrants' Rights Coalition. She's been a consistent and outspoken advocate for voting rights for Maine people for as long as I've known her. Just today, she has a commentary piece, I don't know how many people saw it, in the Portland Press Herald, in which she outlines the steps that Maine should take and can take to continue to be a national leader on voting rights. We are one of 10 states, only 10 states that still don't yet have online voter registration. This is something that Secretary Bellows pointed out and has pledged to work towards. While 62% of Maine voters voted absentee in the 2020 election safely and securely, Secretary Bellows in her article suggests practical steps to make absentee voting even easier for people. She's an advocate for aggressive action on climate change, a defender of the rights of Indigenous people, and a strong supporter for climate justice and justice for women. It's a real honor for me to introduce to you one of my sheroes, Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows. Welcome, Shenna.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It is such an honor and privilege to be here and to hear and learn from the youth leaders this evening. And Kathy, you have created something incredible that thousands of people from across the world are convening this week for these conversations. Culminating tomorrow is just phenomenal. I also want to give a shout out to my good friend Reza, who's doing such great work with the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center. So I just wanted to speak for a few moments. I've been thinking a lot about why, I just muted myself. I've been thinking a lot about why I care so much about climate justice and racial justice. I grew up without electricity or running water until I was in the 5th grade. My mother grew much of our own food and did canning, and we would eat from the gardens and food that she grew over the winter. And we were able to do that because although we were poor, we had land and land that was fertile on which we could grow our own food. And the climate crisis that we're in, and so there was always a pathway for self-sufficiency or a pathway we were fed, even if we were poor. And I look around and reflect and realize that we're in a climate crisis, but there is no climate justice without racial justice. And the systems that have led us to this point are systems that are grounded in white supremacy. And that's a truth that something that those of us who are white, especially those of us in positions of institutional authority, must confront. So one of the reasons I'm so excited about today's panel is you give us hope because you have ideas, good ideas to move us forward. And as each of us listens to you, I think we have a responsibility and a privilege to get to listen to your ideas and amplify that work and be supportive of that work. When I ran for Secretary of State this fall, I ran on 2 goals. One of those goals was technology modernization to better serve the people in our state. And the other goal was equity and inclusion to improve representation within state government and service to all of Maine's communities. And I've been reflecting on how these goals and my leadership as Secretary of State could serve the movement for climate justice. I oversee the Maine State Archives, which are Maine's historical records, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and the Bureau of Corporations, Elections, and Commissions. As the person charged with overseeing Maine State Archives, I think it's really important that we lift up hard history. On the wall behind me is a
Oh, you muted, Shenna.
Again, on the wall behind me, there's a copy of Maine's original Constitution. When I was a kid, I had posters of the preamble to the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights on my bedroom wall. And there's some really exciting aspects of both of those constitutions. The 14th Amendment to the US Constitution has the promise of equal protection under the law for all people. Article 1 of Maine's Constitution, the Declaration of Rights, Section 1, natural rights, states, all people are born equally free and independent and have certain natural, inherent, and inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and of pursuing and obtaining safety and happiness. And Section 2 of the Maine Constitution, Declaration of Rights, states power inherent in people. All power is inherent in the people. All free governments are founded in their authority and instituted for their benefit. But the hard history is those are the good parts of the constitutions, right? They're the parts of our Constitution that embedded in our systems and structures the disenfranchisement of women, of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, systems that perpetuated systemic oppression that brought us to this point. And so in the Bureau of Elections, I think one of the exciting aspects of my job is to think about how do we change those aspects of our Constitution? How do we break down those systems? How do we make sure everyone has a voice and can participate? That's why I think online voter registration and automatic voter registration to make it easier for people to vote is so important. Maine ranks 3rd in the country in voter participation. Just over 75% of eligible Mainers voted in 2020, but we can do better. How do we make sure how do we share some of the good news about what Maine does with the rest of the country as we see what's happening around the country with systematic restriction of voting rights? So for example, Maine has same-day voter registration. We have voting ahead of the election up to 30 days prior to the election. We have voting rights for people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. So sharing that good news in passage of federal legislation like S1 and HR1 may lay the groundwork for then more participation in our democracy. And then there are some concrete things that we're doing. One of my first meetings with Reza was talking about discrimination against immigrants and refugees in credentialing and licensing. And the license and ID card that you have becomes your passport in society, your ability to participate in civic life. So we're making changes at the BMV to make it easier for immigrants and refugees to access licenses. And then we're doing little things. I oversee a fleet of motor vehicles. So this year, for the first time, we're investing in some new electric vehicles and an electric charger. So I think thinking systematically about how we can change systems and then how we can change policies and then how we can change even little decisions like acquisitions and purchasing. To all of the young people in this audience tonight, I want to encourage you to get engaged and to consider running for office. We need your leadership on this panel. We need your leadership in our communities, and we could really use your leadership in the halls of power. Behind me over the mantelpiece is a portrait of Congressman John Lewis. I have 3 other portraits. They were painted by Robert Shutterly, who does a Maine painter who does a series called Americans Who Tell the Truth. And it includes James Baldwin, Rosa Parks, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And all 4 of those individuals were at the March on Washington. But remember, at that time, John Lewis was not yet a congressman. He was a student. He was a youth leader, just like all of you. And he went on to be one of the primary movers and champions of the Voting Rights Act. And then in Congress, to be a lion in Congress, advancing voting rights in many ways, large and small. So when I see you, the youth leaders who are leading this movement for climate justice and racial justice, I see the future John Lewis here in this room tonight. So thank you.
Secretary Bellows, thank you so much. I am a firm believer that the future leaders are right in front of us, and having heard from several of them, and really watching Kosi, who I have not met in person, but really have been profiling online because of your amazing work. I do believe the future is bright with these leaders. So thank you so much for your comments. And also, I want to thank again everybody for joining us and allowing us to record this. We will be providing a copy of the recording to everybody that registered, as well as for those of you that are here tonight. If you do have to sneak out, hopefully not. The one thing I would also like to encourage is, as Kathy said, because this is a week full of amazing activities that are being executed as a result of the Justice for Women lecture, there are a number of additional opportunities. Tomorrow is the main lecture with amazing women leaders. And then Friday, there are 2 events that you are welcome to register for. I'll go ahead in just a moment, place the registration links in the chat box for anybody that is interested either in the main session tomorrow, as well as the Friday events that are listed here on the screen. But I know that I have a great lunch plan for tomorrow and attending the lecture, and hope that you're able to join us as well. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and place the registration link for those events in the chat. And it is a great privilege and honor to welcome back Keisha Lawrence, who is moderating for a second time this week, this conversation. I was really just amazed and in awe when I first met and learned about Keisha's background. And a brief introduction: Keisha comes from the indigenous tribal land of Mawa, New Jersey, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Keisha, and is really just an amazing, accomplished academic. She graduated from the American University of Rome with her BA in International Relations and Global Nations University for Peace. She's completed her MA in International Law and Disputes, and really has been focusing on climate change, indigenous justice, and the Arctic Circle. What was really interesting when I was learning about her background, coming from the native land in Ramapah Lenape Nation, is the intersections that we're really teasing out tonight, that I'm just really anxious to hear from both Keisha as well as the guest speakers that we have today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panel and to our moderator for tonight. We do encourage you to ask questions in the chat box so that we can certainly keep this interactive and certainly safe space for everybody to interact. Over to you, Keisha.
Thank you. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Good evening, good day, depending on where you are, I suppose. So I first want to turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves, as well as pronouns, where you are literally, but also maybe tribal territory you're on, and where your tribal territory, where you're hailing from. So as you all know, Darcy Peters has not joined us just yet. However, Pooja will be our second guest speaker tonight, but I'm first going to turn it over to Kosi Ifeji. Oh, yay.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Kosi. I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from Bangor, Maine, which is on the lands of the Wabanaki tribes. And so I guess where I'm from originally, I was originally born in Maryland, but my family is actually of the Igbo tribe of Nigeria. And so, yeah, I'm a high school junior, and that's just a little bit about me right now.
I would not have guessed high school junior. That's amazing. So my name is Pooja. I'm based in Bensalem, PA, and it's the traditional land of the Lenape Nation. My family comes from India, specifically Gujarat, and we moved here when I was a baby. So with Kennebunkport Climate Initiative, which is one of the organizing hosts of this wonderful discussion today, I won their first climate career competition back in September or October of last year. And so since November, I've been working on, well, I've been implementing my plan to educate, empower, and activate youth in the climate space. And the organization that we're forming is called Youth Climate Collaborative, and Keisha is part of that organization. So we're coming full circle today, but it's great to be here, and I'm excited for a discussion. Thank you all for being here.
Awesome. So I'm just going to jump right into my first question while we're all here. I wanted for both of our speakers to describe the community essentially that you are aiming to reach or specifically advocate for. And then what is the most pressing climate change reality within that location, whether it be scientific realities such as droughts and floods, or if it be more social realities like there's a mill nearby that's poisoning water that the farmers directly use. So just more of a background with regards to your work and the community that you're working for with regards to climate change.
Kosi, do you want to go first or should I go first?
You can go first.
Okay, so first I would like to say it's not communities that we're working for necessarily, but working with. And so we're working with them to, and the community that we're trying to work with is the youth community that is trying to get involved and stay involved in the environmental and climate spaces, and also allies to youth. So that could be retired folks, adults, parents, other allies who want to give a helping hand in empowering youth in these spaces. And the specific, so in terms of designing solutions together to help bring about systemic change or help make it easier for youth to get involved and stay involved, we've together, by talking to youth, identified different pain points that they're experiencing. So one of them is the lack of youth voices in decision-making spaces, the lack of seats in those spaces. Another is the emotional toll that climate change has on communities and youth. And then another is just access to various opportunities like funding resources, knowing what organizations or individuals exist around you that could help you, or avenues to get involved in the climate and environmental spaces. And then there's other pain points that we're noticing as well through our work, like, for example, teachers who are designing curriculum for their students sometimes would enjoy having a open like event nights where they can come and discuss their curriculum and get feedback on the curriculum, so they have people to bounce back ideas with. So those are just some. There's a long list, but hopefully, you know, with time we'll be able to identify more of those pain points and work together to bring about solutions for them. Kosi, I turn it to you, and please correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name.
No, you're actually saying my name just fine. So there's that. And I guess for me, I think the communities that I work with, the way that Pooja framed it, I guess it kind of starts off with kind of a little bit more on my background. So I moved to Maine when I was about 7 years old, from Maryland, as I already talked about earlier. And, you know, I lived right outside of DC, around 10 minutes away. And so definitely a big metropolitan area. And so moving from such a large area to Bangor, Maine was very different. You know, it was a bit of a culture shock. And so I guess for me, it was kind of one of the first things that I noticed was the focus on nature of Maine. And it was honestly really beautiful to me, but also very eye-opening that, you know, people, mostly people of color that I was around when I lived in Maryland did not have access to the natural beauties of the world. And so, you know, there's kind of that, but also the fact that, you know, I'm one of very few people of color, more specifically Black people in the state of Maine. And, you know, that has definitely framed my journey uh, as a person in the world. And so I guess when we're talking about the communities that I work with, it'd probably be, you know, Black Mainers and, you know, people of color in Maine, but more specifically, people of color in Maine that are looking to get involved in climate work. And so I kind of hold a few different roles and I do a few different things, but a lot of my work focuses on um, racial justice and climate justice and, you know, the intersection between the two. And so I'm a fellow for the Maine Environmental Education Association, the MIA Changemakers, and I'm also one of the youth co-chairs for the Nature-Based Education Consortium's Climate Education Task Force. And so I just work with those two groups a lot about policy and overall just youth-driven climate initiatives. And then additionally, I've also done a lot of work with my school district. You know, my experiences as a Black Mainer, a person of color in a predominantly white school, has not been the best. And so this past summer, an article was published by the local newspaper, the Bangor Daily News, pretty much just talking about me and some other students of colors um, uh, experience in a predominantly white school. And from that, you know, a lot of different conversations has been sparked and, you know, change has been coming from that. So that's, you know, something that I'm also really proud of as well.
Thank you so much on so many different levels. I think my tribal land is New York, New Jersey, parts of Pennsylvania. However, I've grown up in Rhode Island. And I think being this far up on the Northeast, there's a lot of stereotypes and negative light around people of color in natural, beautiful environmental areas, whether they be indigenous to somewhere or not. The fact that we're all indigenous to Earth gets lost, I think, in a lot of those realities and access. I'm going to repeat a question that's been typed in from Kathy. For Cozy, could you tell us a little more about Changemakers? What is it? What are their goals? And why is the group so important to you?
Yeah, so Changemakers is a network of youth and adult allies across the state of Maine that's mostly focused on youth and pretty much encouraging youth and providing them with opportunities and resources to be agents of change in their community. And it's something that I'm really passionate about because I got connected with the network about uh like a year and a half ago, and it's been one of the best experiences that I've had. And you know, going into it, it's one of those things where I've always stuck out as a sore thumb in any place in Maine because I am a person of color. But you know, in Changemakers, it was kind of one of those first times where I saw very diverse perspectives, very diverse, you know, people from diverse backgrounds. And so that's definitely why I'm extremely passionate about Changemakers, because there is a not even just a focus, but everything, well, yeah, I guess, yeah, a large focus, and everything is pretty much centered around you know, this diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity of background. And so that's definitely why I'm super passionate about the organization.
Thank you. I hope that was a sufficient answer, Kathy. I feel like I now have to Google Changemakers, go to the website. I want to move forward with a question that is for both of you. I'm not sure who wants to go first, but I'll pose the question first. With regards to climate change, youth voices, female voices, indigenous voices, BIPOC voices, how has climate change affected positively or negatively the culture around the work that you're doing and the people that ultimately need more access and more space? Whether it be in your own personal experiences or just via other research that you have found or somebody else's experiences that you're working with.
Yeah, I can take the first stab at this. So I think first it requires all of us to examine the climate change narratives that we're hearing today and asking ourselves, you know, whose story are we hearing? Whose narrative is this? Where is this narrative coming from? Whose voices are missing from these narratives? And then asking, how can we bring these missing voices to the narrative space so that they have the platform to speak for themselves and share their stories. And I forgot the other part of the question.
No, I guess it's,
yeah, I forgot the.
no, treat it more so as an open-ended question, I suppose, with how climate change positively or negatively is impacting the work that you do in the communities that we're all striving to assist and be a part of in a deeper level.
Yeah, I think there's a very like the climate change narrative at the moment is very like white savior dominant, or like about white people and their experiences out in nature. And so and even if you look at the leadership in nonprofits, in private companies, or in sustainability officer positions, or any of these related leadership positions in council, city council, government, Senate, you know, you name it, it's majority white. And there are a lot of underrepresented populations and voices in decision-making spaces. So it's very important to show youth from all different backgrounds, you know, even like rural community voices are missing from a lot of these decision-making spaces. So really showing that it's possible for anyone to get to these platforms and to share their opinions and their voices, and bring the voices of their communities with them. So showing that it's possible by making it a reality is really important.
Yeah, I kind of just want to add on to what's already been said, but yeah, I really do think that the climate change narrative right now is very white savior-esque, very Eurocentric. You know, if we look at, you know, some of the countries that we kind of look towards as, you know, being pillars of, you know, carbon neutral future, we think of European countries and things like that. But at the same time, we have to really evaluate, you know, what their actual processes are to get, you know, to this carbon neutral future. And a lot of them do come from, you know, things like solar panels. But to build solar panels, you have to have these rare earth metals that you can only find where? In underdeveloped countries in the global south. And so that right there has a lot of, you know, there's a lot of different, you know, as I already said, you know, so Eurocentric ideals in that as well. A lot of extractionary mindsets. And I do think that when, you know, even though we are talking about climate, and that's something that hasn't really been done a lot in the past, we have to really focus on what is the best way to approach climate issues. Because if we don't look at what the best way to approach climate issues, then it's just going to be another area where white supremacy is reached and overpowers.
Thank you, both of you. That was phenomenal answers and very loaded. And one, I would say, Cozy, your response almost ties into a question that we received, at least from my point of view, from somebody who was living in Jordan, oh my goodness, the name is Jordan, grew up in Germany and moved to the United States at a young age. And there are some things in the United States that seem to be slightly overlooked. For example, people in the United States tend to hang out with similar people to them, meaning similar to themselves, instead of observing the differences and celebrating them. Are there ways that we can use climate change as the struggle, but instead to unify people in the United States? I would actually like to pose this question to the Secretary of State while she's still here, with regards to, I suppose, the United States demographic and cultural stance in comparison to other portions of the world who might be colonizers but are moving towards a more diverse path, whether it be wanted or not. How does climate change play a role there?
Well, this is such a great question, and I have to say, I'm still reflecting on what Kosi and Pooja just said about the white savior complex and how frequently that enters into the I think all areas of political leadership or the political space that we're in. Let's be candid. I'm the first female Secretary of State in 200 years. I am the 50th white Secretary of State in 200 years. We have yet to have a Black or Indigenous or person of color in this role. And I'm mindful of that. And unfortunately, hopefully we'll get to the last of the firsts, I hope, within our lifetimes, and stop having the novelty of the first female or the first person of color, or the first Black, Asian vice president is a good step forward, but who's next? When do we stop with the firsts? Climate change is leading to serious and really human rights crises with migration patterns. We in Maine are the beneficiaries of people who are coming to this country for a variety of different reasons, but some of those reasons rooted in human rights tragedies emerging from, or certainly contributed to by climate change. That makes our state a better state for that immigration into our state. And I think seeing Maine become slowly a more diverse place is really exciting. It's our future is recruiting people to come and live and participate here in our society. So I think the question is, how can we use climate change to unify the people of the United States? Climate change is contributing to migration patterns that are making the United States a more diverse place. The question becomes, how do we become more welcoming? How do we become more inclusive? How do we share in institutional power and opportunity? I think those are questions that we have to ask ourselves every single day. It can't be a one-off answer, but it has to be engagement in those solutions.
I think to piggyback on these comments, first, I want to say we should probably, like, to answer your question, Jordan, I think first we got to look at history as well. So how can we use climate change to unify people, right? There's been previous issues, right? And still existing issues of like racial justice and injustice, of just human rights violations throughout history. How come we haven't been able to unify with those issues, right? And climate change is another issue where we can use it to unify people. It's not like there have been issues before this that could have unified people better, and there will be issues. There are issues along with this that we can use to unify people. And we've seen in the last year, I guess, there have been more, there's been movements happening to unify people around racial injustice and justice and around climate change. But I think that they're finally taking momentum with certain people in power who hadn't been putting, their money where their words were and stuff before. And so we are seeing a shift, and that's really good, but there's a lot of work still to be done. And in terms of your first point of people tending to hang out with people that are similar to them, I don't think this is a problem unique to the US. I think personally that this is a problem in lots of parts of the world. And how America differs from many countries is that it is more heterogeneous than many countries, which sometimes, which tend to lack this amount of diversity, or there's different kind of diversity. And so getting people from different cultures, different backgrounds to mix is not always easy, but we do see it happening. And as climate change worsens in this country, and we do see migration happening, there will be even more mixing of people from different cultures, and that will force conversations. And through conversations and getting to know people and being open-minded, I think people will see the common humanity in each other. And climate change is about that, bringing people together on our shared experiences with climate change. And so hopefully through shared experience and story exchange, we can foster that unity.
Thank you for that, Pooja, as well as Secretary of State Bellows. And both of you brought something up that kind of sparked my brain cells. I feel like we've used, and by we, I'm speaking of a collective we as an Indigenous person, but also family hailing from the Netherlands. There is a colonial aspect there. But I feel like we've used the climate to divide people, and all Indigenous people definitely know this. And one of the best examples I can think of is the Lakota and Pahasapa, known as the Black Hills, but ultimately known to most Americans as Mount Rushmore. It was never for sale. There was a legal treaty declaring that it would never be for sale, but instead it was stolen and made to honor the colonizers ultimately, but it's still at the heart and in the core of the reservation of the Lakota people. And so when we think about using climate to divide people historically, when we talk about history, one of the best ways to then bring justice back to any people is to ideally restore. It's hard to restore land that's constantly being abused and dying, but we can all attempt to unify over the fact that there is only one Mother Earth. And I think a lot of what you all have said on many different levels, comes back to that. Whether it be different solutions, whether they be gender equality, education, political decision making, youth voices, as well as elder voices. And I think that's phenomenal. I want to go back to a question that came up earlier, specifically for the Secretary of State. And it was just asking, what are some of the biggest challenges you've experienced throughout your path when running for office? So tying back to the female voices at the start of this conversation.
Thank you. And I wrote a private answer in the chat that I will share with the group. One of the barriers was confidence in myself. There are so many forces in these movements telling you no. And there's so many failures if you're truly seeking justice, if you're challenging the status quo, if you're challenging incumbency, and if you're challenging racism and sexism, you're going to lose sometimes. I remember the marriage equality movement. We won in the legislature, and then via referendum, it was overturned, and discrimination remained the law of the land. Well, the day that we lost, the very next day, we did a press conference and we said, we're not giving up. Our next campaign starts today. That's really hard in movements to maintain the stamina and the emotional energy to persist. It's in running for office, there is the added challenge of belief in yourself as an individual. And running for US Senate was a huge challenge, and I lost very badly. So to run again and to put my name on a ballot again and face that possibility of losing has been a barrier. In fact, I thought about running for Secretary of State a year ago, and in conversations with some friends who said, you'll never win, I believed that, and I decided not to run. And I went back to that decision last summer, and again, decided not to run. And then a couple of weeks before the election, a friend called me and said, why are there only men running for Secretary of State? And I was like, well, I was gonna run. I would love this job. I'm really passionate about voting rights. I really have a lot of experience actually in driver license policy and immigration. But I decided I couldn't win. And she said, what? You should run. So I did, and I won. But I think the connection and all of the leadership that Kosi and Pooja and Keisha, you're doing, is there going to be great losses. Issue-wise, personally, you've already experienced them, Kosi. I read those articles, and your voice and your courage in standing up to what you've experienced and giving voice to hopefully prevent that from happening to others is so important. But it comes at a cost. So thank you for doing what you do, and I hope you keep doing it.
Thank you so much. Does anybody want to jump in with any other questions? Cozy, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything. I don't know if there's questions amongst you all for each other right now. I want to give an opportunity for that before I continue with reading different questions.
Yeah, I guess I can jump in really quickly. Just with, I mean, I know I don't have any political experience. I'm only 16, but I guess just, to that wins and losses point, like, I guess, being a part of so few people of color in the state of Maine has just, really, I guess it's kind of, I've lost a lot of, I've lost a lot of, I guess, I don't know the best way to describe it. Um, it's just not has always been the easiest thing for me. But I guess it's one of those things that have definitely shaped who I am as a person. So I guess, I kind of gained a lot of, personal growth, which is um, something really great. But yeah, I guess that comes at a price for sure.
And your ability to turn challenge into opportunity is part of your leadership and why you're already making such a difference in our state and why you will continue to make such a difference. And I think that's something that social justice and environmental activists have in common is looking for how can I turn this setback into movement forward? How can I turn this challenge into something better and stronger for the movement?
Great. I'm going to jump into another question. And this is coming from an Alan. Both of my parents are from the Philippines. I visited the country multiple times and have observed extensive poverty and pollution. What are some reasonable solutions that can help clean up third world countries? How can foreign governments spread awareness or provide economic incentives to help these countries deal with climate change? I just want to, before that question even fully goes out, I want to add to, I have a lot of friends from the Philippines, and there was, I think it was last year, a few portions of the country that are designated or very highly populated for tourism that completely shut down, just given the amount of pollution tourism also occurs or brings up. So keeping that in mind, I suppose, whether it be your answers or other countries that come up in the conversation, I think that's huge when we talk about climate change, tourism, and that white savior concept.
Yeah, I can answer this as best as I can. So I think instead of like even focusing on, spreading awareness or providing economic incentives to help these countries, we really need to look at our own behavior within our countries. So right, this goes back to climate change and seeing that the impact by the US and a lot of other what is it, like European and North American countries are affecting I don't like using the term developing nations because I feel like we're all developing still, but countries in Asia and in Africa, they are receiving the harm based on our decisions. So if we just cut back our emissions and we stop exporting our trash in exchange for, like, we're paying, right, the Philippines, places in the Philippines and other countries to accept our plastic and our other trash. And instead of trying to do that, finding a system in-house, right, because we're so wealthy, we literally just take our problems elsewhere, right? Or we don't try and solve them in-house. And that's what we really need to do first, instead of like causing it and then fixing something, right? It's just, it's like, if you have like a bathtub and the water is running, you would want to close the tap so that it doesn't overflow instead of, trying to like take that water, put it in another bowl or something like that. So that's what we need to do, is just like turn off the tap first before we go and try cleaning up. Be careful with the words you use, by the way. But yeah, cleaning up third world countries and providing economic incentives. So yeah, question some of your rhetoric as well. Ask your teacher.
Cozy, did you want to jump in? I guess, with a response to foreign governments and climate change?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it does come down to international relations between, you know, more economically advantaged countries like the United States and like the European Union. But, you know, I guess a lot of it does fall on, you know, these quote unquote more developed countries, because even though these quote unquote underdeveloped countries, these countries of the global south, they are not they're not necessarily contributing to climate change as much as countries like the United States or countries in the European Union, but they're still receiving the most negative impacts of climate change back onto them and back onto their citizens. And so, yeah, pretty much just echoing everything that Pooja just said, the United States has to look to itself and actions that the United States government can do to, you know, that the United States government can do to better help these countries. You know, things like, you know, maybe stop giving our trash to these countries, and so, you know, just kind of cutting the root, cutting pretty much taking the weed out right by the root, and the root of the problem for a lot of the cases is the United States and other more quote unquote developed countries.
I actually, if it's all right, Jono, you have great experience working with, you know, the Red Cross and in disaster relief and all of that. I'd be curious to hear your answer to this question.
Yeah, I just to add brilliant reflections from Kosi and Pooja. You know, ironically for Secretary Bellows, my husband and I just moved back before I took the job at KCI from Panama. So your Peace Corps experience, I was catty corner in Ciudad de Saber, next to Peace Corps headquarters. But to Pooja's point, and Kosi, the most dominant offenders of contributing to climate change are the industrialized global north, right? So just the scientific data and the disproportionate impacts that it has on less developed countries is enormous. And that's been, you know, not a new phenomena, that's been decades and decades. The one reflection I also have vis-a-vis foreign assistance is particularly the last administration, we saw devastating cuts to the foreign assistance budget that truly prevented communities from really talking about climate change in a way that was honest and earnest. So in fact, most of my colleagues that worked at USAID during the previous administration weren't allowed to use the word climate change. The doctrine was scrubbed from policy documents. And so there really was a difficult stance for individuals who understand the linkages between education, population rise, that impact countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, where we see a net export of individuals and a huge amount of climate migration vis-a-vis foreign assistance budgets. So I think to Pooja's point, it's something that I've been watching. There was a great study that was just published by Baylor Medical School looking at the impacts of climate change on human trafficking, which is another really alarming wake-up call, I think, in terms of what happens when we cut foreign assistance budgets. If we look at the Northern Triangle, specifically El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, the intentions over the past 4 years were to cut off foreign assistance, hoping the problem would solve itself. And we know, just based off of historical evidence, that tying back to the comments around kind of the white savior complex, that did more harm than good. And it's caused all this pent up net migration that is now resulting in outflows north. And having seen that, especially Secretary Bellows, I don't know, in your time in Panama, along the Colombian border and Venezuelan border, there's people making a migration journey that have real strong linkages to climate change. It's food insecurity, it's devastation and drought, it's conflict that's driven by climate change and lack of economic opportunity. So all these things that are very, interrelated, I think are very important to raise, and importantly, to really build around, foreign assistance policies that are not myopic and really build towards a longer term solution. But I'm seeing some positive signs, not to leave on a gloom and doom message before turning it back. There's really been, in a short period of time, some real reversal of these myopic foreign assistance policies that I think are going to lead to a much more intentional approach to addressing intersectionality between climate change and foreign assistance. And kudos to states like Maine that are really welcoming what we have seen as the net impacts of that forced displacement from across the globe.
Thank you so much for that input, but also a geographical change in terms of conversation and climate change. Environmental refugees is a real reality. And I think island nations right now are at the crux of that, but obviously that's changing throughout the world. There are a lot of questions that relate to the conversation that literally just happened, some with regards to white saviorism, which I think is a term that we all understand differently via all of our experiences. And I tend to think personally of white saviorism as a different form of white guilt. And I think when we talk about white saviorism with regards to assisting foreign nations, I think it's also important to keep in mind that there's an incentive for being a wealthy nation, as well as there's an incentive for being a poor nation when it comes to the IMF and the World Trade Organization. Those are unfortunate realities of the way the United Nations works politically. GDP, although does play a role for determining developed, developing, or least developed nations, they are also self-proclamations. So China chooses to label itself a developing nation. That's not necessarily fully accurate to their ability to function as a country. That doesn't change, though, the way they would or would not receive money depending on how the world moves forward with climate change in regards to international funds. So I'm going to leave those questions alone for now, only because I want to go back to an earlier question tying climate change to politics. So climate change has become much more of a political stance rather than really being seen for what it is, which is the health and well-being of our planet. Do you find it important to steer away climate change being recognized as a political stance, as to not divide people over something that really shouldn't be political in the first place? If so, in what ways could we benefit? Could this benefit the movement as a whole?
Yeah, I'll say it's just a delay tactic, honestly. That's how I see it. It's a delay tactic for people to avoid having to take like actual meaningful action on climate change. It's very harmful to creating progress in climate change, because when things are overly politicized, then you're creating divisiveness in the country. And we spoke earlier about climate change being a unifying topic. And so if you're using these terms and aligning climate change with, being a lefty or being, a Democrat or in the leftist policy or with the Green, you're not looking at it as like across the spectrum, regardless of your politics or political alignment, then you're really encouraging that division amongst Americans or wherever you are in the world. You're encouraging that division rather than unifying folks. So it's very damaging.
Yeah, I guess kind of just to add on to that, if we look at the way that the United States government operates and functions, is that when it comes to political issues, because we have a two-party system, if a common consensus cannot be reached, then there's going to be a stalemate. And, that was kind of purposely the way that it was designed. So, so that individuals can, come to a common consensus before moving on with progress. But when it comes to issues like climate change is not a political issue. It's a human rights issue. And we can see that, especially when we're talking about forced migration, and other things like that, that there are real world consequences, that heavily impact, us humans. And, just because we in Maine, we in the United States may not be seeing that in our everyday lives, it's still there. It's still there in a lot of different capacities, even with, people that live in the United States. If we look at some lower income neighborhoods around the United States, there's a lot more air pollution and things like that. So right then and there, that is a public health crisis. And so there's just a lot of different, because because it's been labeled as a political issue, there has been that stalemate because people want to continue in this, very short-minded, short field of sight of what we need to do as a nation. But there are going to be, and there has started to be, long-term consequences for these actions.
Well said. I was pausing because I didn't know, Secretary of State Bellows, if you wanted to add anything with regards to that question, just considering the political logistics.
I think it's just to build on what Kosi was just saying, this is a human rights issue. It's not a political issue. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think sometimes there are going to have to be hard conversations when you're talking about climate justice or racial justice. You can't, I was talking about the racist impact of forcing people to carry a specific type of voter ID to the poll. And a well-meaning person said, can't you talk about that without using the word racist? And is there something else you could say about it? And I was like, well, the data states that if I forget my ID and go to the polls, I'm still going to be able to vote. But in other states where they have specific types of forced IDs for voting, there's a disproportionate impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So no, you can't have this conversation without talking about a racist impact of a policy like this. So similarly with climate change, some of these conversations are going to be uncomfortable, especially because there are things we have to give up to, including what we think of as a way of life and some of our systems. And for those of us in positions of power, some of our power, perceptions of power. So I think those can be hard conversations, but are really, really important ones, even if it makes people feel a little uncomfortable.
Thank you. I just typed a statement or a thank you for sharing the unfortunate realities of forced ID. Being Native, we can use our tribal cards to work and make money. However, we can't use them to vote depending on the state or the reservation relationship to the state that you're in. So it's definitely a huge reality that for a majority of places is at the forefront. And I think we saw that with this past election in Arizona, Nevada, and the lovely CNN just putting Indigenous people as the other category, because for the first time we came out in full force, made sure we got driver's license to drive across the res just to vote, which is huge and it's significant, but it didn't fully get valued the way it should have historically.
Keisha, can you say something more about that? What did CNN do? Explain that, if you would.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I guess colloquially, with regards to Native humor, it got used a lot on social media, but it also became a meme at different points. CNN, during the demographic breakdown of all the political corresponders on TV, when it came to the voters, Caucasian, Black, Asian, they had Latino up there, and then right under that was other. And based on people who actually went through to physically look at data versus just listen to it on TV in the few-minute breakdown, it showed that for the first time, Indigenous Americans came out and voted in much higher numbers than we had seen even during Obama's election, either one. And in particular, I have my own theories on that, but Natives, we also have our elections around the same time. We vote for chiefs every 4 years also, and that's not coincidence. The United States used that from our own model of the Iroquois Confederacy. So CNN, however, I guess chose not to acknowledge Indigenous voices with regards to this election.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Mm.
With that being said, my next question goes back to indigeneity, but at an international level. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People specifies that indigeneity is a self-proclamation based on ancient and ancestral relationship and spiritual connection to specific locations on Mother Earth. In many of these locations that are also experiencing climate change travesties, there are Indigenous people still able to live on that territory and non-Indigenous people. With regards to the work that you're doing and the communities that you're coming from, how do you see the overlap or similarities or drastic differences between Indigenous experiences and the other that are still in those areas, like rural communities, hunters, gatherers, people that are still subsistence livers even. And I'm gonna first start this with Kosi, if that's okay.
Yeah, so kind of tell me if I'm not getting the full perspective of the question, but I guess, when we're talking about you talked a little bit about how, people are indigenous to different lands, and I guess for me, my family is indigenous to, Nigeria. As I talked about a little bit earlier, I'm of the Igbo tribe of Nigeria. And so, especially when we're talking about climate change, and the exploitation of the global south, that is something that, as I talked about a lot earlier, that does affect my people in back home. And if we talk about a lot of international relation policies, a lot of that has been kind of disproportionately ill affecting African nations. I'm just going to speak more broadly about all African nations and not just Nigeria. And so if we look at, as we talked about a little bit earlier, if we look at the indigenous people to those lands, how those resources are being extracted, things like those rare earth metals that are found nowhere else, but in abundance in those lands, it's so disproportionately affecting those indigenous populations in different countries. But I feel like in the United States, it's just not necessarily talked about as well. And of course, we need to talk about the indigenous people to the United States as well. But I think, if we're talking about indigenousness as a whole, I think we definitely need to talk about different places, different peoples that are indigenous to different areas, if that makes sense. And so if I didn't get the full scope of the question, please let me know.
No, that's exactly what I'm asking. So the UN specifies that via UNDRIP that indigeneity, it's a self-determination. We can't defy gravity, so we're all rooted somewhere, but the places that are ancestral to us or spiritual to us or that we hold a connection to over time can change. And I guess between those who do identify as indigenous and those who don't but might still live in those places or have deep connections to those places, how do we bridge that gap? How do we avoid things like white saviorism? And instead it's like, well, I live right next to a reservation, but yes, I am white, but man, I struggle with the same realities because this is where I am. And vice versa is more so, I guess, the root of my question.
Yeah, I guess I have to, sit and think about that a little bit more. But I guess a lot of things just kind of goes back to conversations, because only the people that live in those communities will know what's impacting them, but they may just not have not even necessarily the resources, but just the, spark generating ideas to kind of, solve the.
Oh, Kosi froze.
Oh,
There
can
we
you guys hear
go.
me? Oh, okay, great. Yeah, my internet's unstable. I'm so sorry. So I guess where where exactly did I leave off?
Sparking ideas or solutions amongst the two groups.
Yeah, definitely a lot of conversations just need to be had because obviously only the individuals that are in a specific that are living in a specific area will know what's affecting them. And so a lot of ideas, a lot of things can be sparked by just simple conversation. I think, just starting with those conversations, that's what needs to be happening, at least as a first step.
Thank you. I see that we are close to the end of our time. If anyone wants to add in some other thoughts before we do officially close, that would be nice. Like I said, if there are other questions that I didn't get to or missed, if you want to type them out again or throw them this way, it would be much appreciated and accepted.
I just want to thank Kosi and Pooja, Keisha, for giving us this rich conversation. One of the most important things at this point is, as Reza said at the beginning of this program, when we started to think about what we might do, is how do we keep this conversation going? Because it's so important to have all of your perspectives and your ideas in the conversation. So we're going to keep talking and thinking about that. And if you have ideas about that, please let us know. But thank you all. Great job.
I would just echo that. Really, Keisha, Kosi, Pooja, I put a hashtag inspired in there, and 3 days of amazing, thought-provoking conversations that we hope, like Kathy said, really to continue. I know one thing we've done a lot of reflection on, and Pooja has been a big part of that, is really just thinking about the intentionality of how we as a new organization connect with communities at the most local level. We're very inspired by Edgar Villanueva, who's done a lot of work as a Native American on really decolonizing wealth and decolonizing the philanthropic structures that often aren't really aligned with the climate and environmental space that we heard from Kosi and Pooja. And there is, if you haven't had a moment to check it out, an amazing initiative from the donorsofcolor.org forum that really call out that less than 1.3% of all philanthropic giving from the top 40 funders are going to BIPOC climate and BIPOC environmental initiatives. And so I really just use that as a echo chamber to say we have a long way to go, but with Keisha, Kosi, and Pooja to really feel inspired by the future that is ahead of us. And there isn't a day that I wake up where I feel gloom and doom. We have a lot at risk, but I believe we have the right pieces in place to really turn the tide on what we've seen over the decades. And again, thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. I know it was a late night session. I'll turn it back over to Kathy, Reza, and certainly to anybody else that would like to provide closing remarks.
I also want to take a moment to thank Shenna for spending an evening with us and for listening and for being where she is and for fighting that good fight, picking herself up despite the losses in the past. It's so important for us as a state to have you where you are. So thank you for your courage and determination. And I echo what you said earlier, Pooja, Kosi, Keisha, run for office. Thank you.
So thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Get some rest and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you. Katapatash.
Bye.